Say, if you just hang on a minute,
Yep, sure.
if you just read off the cup what it says, and then explain to us what it was and how you came about it and where you won it. Okay, right.
Okay. Right. This is the cup which was presented to me for winning the billiards championship in the Working Men's Club as a 15-year-old boy. We were privileged, about half a dozen of us, to become members of the club during the war, because all the eligible 18-year-olds were in the services, you see. And one or two of us lads in the village were privileged to become members and played billiards. I'd played billiards on an old 6-foot table top in a friend's house since 1937. So going onto a full-size table was quite an experience, and I had a little knowledge of the game, and I had a natural aptitude for playing billiards, I suppose, and it was my good fortune to win the championship the first year I entered, you see, as a 15-year-old. So that was rather lucky, and I won again in 47. Well, just before I was demobbed, I was coming over here and I still entered the competition, and in 48 when I was fully demobbed, you know.
Tell me a bit about the club.
The club? Well, do you want me to hold this or not?
No, it's
Yeah. I don't know a great deal about the history of the club, but in those days, you look back on the village, we were, all rural villages were poor in as regards materialism. You know, there's very few people who'd got money in those days. The majority of the inhabitants were either allied to agriculture or builders. There were one or two people in the village who went into town to what you call, white-collar workers, if you like. But the village club itself, I don't know how it came into its inception, but the president of the club in those days was Colonel Harrison from Witznor Hall. He was one of the wealthy local squires in those days, you see, and he was helped patronise the club. So you've got to bear in mind that the only source of income was from the billiard tables. And there were two upstairs, you see, and the cost, they're only open from about 6 in the evening till 10 or half past at night. And all there was up there was 2 billiard tables, there was a darts board, and they had a steward, a gentleman in the village who was injured during the Great War, Mr. Joe Thorpe, delightful gentleman who we used to torment. He had a stick, you see, a walking stick, and we lads used to go up there in the club and play, and just a gentle banter, you see, and he would, if we were upsetting him a bit, he would walk around while we were playing billiards, you see, and you're leaning over the table having a shot, and suddenly a whack across the backside had come from old Joe Thorpe, you see, just to pull you into line, if you like, all done friendly way, manner, but it kept a discipline which was paramount in those days in the club, you see, and it was very nice. So, of course, the club itself, from income to support it, was virtually nil. You see, if you work out, there were 2 billiard tables, and they used to pay 3 pennies for half an hour's play each. You see, so 2 players. So the table would earn 6pence. It would earn a shilling for an hour's play. You see, in theory, there weren't many nights when the tables were full. So if you equate that amount to the total income it's only open 6 days a week, you see, 6 nights a week. The income was only a matter of a few shillings in those days, and out of that they had to pay Mr. Thorpe, a steward, a few odd coppers a week, which he would get, you see. So it was not a wealthy club, but at least it was part and parcel of the village life in those days, you see. Lots of villages had no club at all. It was our good fortune to have a club with 2 damn good tables to play on, you see.
There was no income from alcohol sales then?
Oh no, I'm not sure whether there was some tie-up with the Methodists there. I'm not quite sure, but I remember alcohol was not allowed in there, and it wasn't allowed in there right up after I left and joined the services, so throughout the whole of the war and in the immediate post-war years, alcohol was not allowed in the club at all.
Well, if you think about life in your life in the village prior to joining the services,
to my village lads, we have a gang of us, you see, and I was about one of 4 or 5 of us all, and we used to amuse ourselves. We'd go weekends, probably down the meadows there, and one of us would have a tent, and you'd camp out there on a Saturday night, you see, and you'd get up in the morning at daybreak, and then you'd probably have a bottle of pop. One bottle of pop may have been, somebody may have had a copper or 2 in their pocket and bought a bottle of pop, which you would share amongst, 4 or 5 of you, you see. Everything in those days, as kids, if you like, I hate the use of the word kids, but was shared. Because if one of you had got a penny in your pocket, or even a halfpenny, 10 to 1 that 2 or 3 of your other colleagues hadn't even got that in their pocket, you see. So you grew up, and whatever you had, you shared amongst yourselves. If you'd got a halfpenny, you might go to the village tuck shop up the road there, Mrs. Dickinson's at the bottom of the bridge, and you'd perhaps buy 10 aniseed balls for a halfpenny. Well, you'd share it amongst your friends, you see. And because you had no money or no material possessions, it didn't matter. You didn't starve, you had food in your stomach, your parents found something for you to eat, and you naturally grew up. You went to school, had a damn good village school to go to, the All Saints School. It's a damn good village school, and I had the good fortune to go to grammar school from there in 1939. So we were really very fortunate, I reckon anyway. I can go back, some of my earliest reflections in the village was 1930, when the R100 flew over the village. The R100 airship. I remember that flying. That was in 1931, when I was 3. That's about my earliest recollection. And then I think it was in 31, they put the main sewer through the village, which of course is quite an engineering feat in those days, you see. One company went bust, putting the main sewer in through shifting sand. Of course, the village is resting on a bed of aggregates and sand, you see. And in those days, the water table was much, much higher than today, of course. And this company went bust, putting shifting sands on the corner of Exchange Road and Welfare Road, on that corner there. They went bust. That was in 1931 time. That was my earliest recollection. And I do remember that the pavements were non-existent in those days. There used to be a grass bank up the side of the road there, and your pavement was on the top, this grass bank, and everybody had a coal fire in those days, and the ashes used to be collected by a gentleman called Arthur Prince. Charlie Prince down on the corner there, it was his stepbrother, I believe. He ran the business there, and he collected the ashes from various houses, you see, and he spread the ashes on the top of the grass banks, which were the pavements in those days, before they put the main the main sewer was put in, of course, and then the road and had curbstones was put on afterwards, you see. So that's one of the early recollections in the village.
And so that, when there were no pavements and Arthur Prince spread the ash, was that pre-war, or did that go on during the war?
Oh no, that was pre-war. That was in the early 30s. Oh yes, I can just. Well, I was born in 28, you see. I can just remember those happening, you see.
Can I take you back to the war then? And I've seen a photograph of you in the ATC.
Oh yes. That was at the grammar school.
Do you have any stories about the ATC?
Oh no. During the war, of course, young lads, I happened to be the youngest in a gang of about 5 or 6 of us, you see. My other pals were a year and 2 year older. And as the war progressed, of course, when you're 13 and 14, you're not particularly interested in war. You know, headlines in the paper didn't mean much. Only when you get towards your 15 and 16 and 1 or 2 of them had gone into the services, you see. So the headlines of the war didn't mean a great deal. We had things like the RAF station up here was operating during the war, and throughout the war various aircraft crashed around the area. I can name you sort of half a dozen spots where Wellingtons or Lancasters crashed and all the crew were killed, you know, coming into land. There's one at Mitherham at Croxall, another one at an area called Botany Bay, Whitemore Hay there. There was one up here at Sluzzy Lane, another one just off the A38 in the field opposite where the hotel is there. By the canal came in, we saw it coming in. I actually saw it coming into land over from by the Paul Pry, which was in those days, and it caught the top of a poplar, and bingo, it crashed into the field up at the A38, you see. All the crew were killed in those days. So that was, life went on in the village, and eventually all my muckers were called up, so I was 17, and you couldn't get into the services you know, fast enough in those days. You were hell bent on knocking 8 bells out of the Hun. It was natural way of life, you see. So of course I volunteered in the Air Training Corps in the grammar school, you see, and you volunteered. You couldn't get into the services fast enough, you see. I volunteered, and oh no, you aren't old enough to join yet a while, you see. But the moment I was 17 and a quarter, bingo, I left school when I was, that's right, 17 and a quarter. At school one day and in the RAF the next day, you see. An aircrew cadet, I passed for aircrew, and that was, my contemporaries were aircrew lads, you see, and so of course it was nice to be one of them.
But prior to that you were in the ATC?
Pardon?
Were you in the ATC prior to that?
Oh, prior to...
prior to...
Well, you couldn't, you see, you joined the Air Training Corps by 11 or 12, you see. I think it was about that. And I remember being in it during my school career at the grammar school. And we had good. We used to go to various camps during the war, and I remember the air training corps. We went to RAF Sawbury near Shrewsbury there, and having a trip in a glider, the Horsa gliders, which were towed out during the when we invaded France, at D-Day. The Horsa gliders were full of troops, and they were towed by Wellingtons and Stirlings and Lancasters, and we had a trip from RAF Sawbury up to Cheshire, and there's one of these gliders, as cadets. We used to camp under canvas, which was damn good fun in those days, you see. And so it was, you didn't really, apart from the headlines in the papers, know that there was a war on in Orrewith. And of course, apart from the aircraft coming and going at RAF Fradley, you see, the 1,000 bomber raids, the aircraft flew from Fradley in the 1,000 bomber raids, which was getting on towards the end of the war, you see. I was called up when they were needing them, but the war ended just after I joined up, you see. So I never got to, they stopped training aircrew and I was called up, so I never got into being trained for aircrew, and came back and ended up at in a library at one place and R.O. Gloucester in another, where you played rugby then. Once you got into the station team, you see, whether you were a soccer player, mingled with the officers, and on the pitch you were all the same, but off the pitch you respected their rank and their position, you see. But on the pitch you were all the same, and you'd have a good game, you'd have your...
We won't on this shot see your face, we'll just be looking at the close-up of the